Port Charles was left reeling after a tense confrontation between Lucas and Marco took an unexpected turn. What began as a private argument quickly became the talk of the town as witnesses described raised voices, raw emotions, and a moment that no one saw coming. Lucas had been carrying weeks of frustration after learning information he believed Marco had kept from him. Feeling hurt and betrayed, Lucas demanded answers. Marco tried to explain, insisting there had been a misunderstanding, but Lucas was too overwhelmed to listen. The exchange grew heated, drawing attention from nearby staff and visitors. By the time others stepped in to calm the situation, the damage had already been done. Marco, visibly shaken, left the scene without another word. Lucas, realizing how far things had escalated, stood in stunned silence as the weight of his actions began to sink in. News of the incident spread rapidly through Port Charles. Friends and colleagues were divided. Some sympathized with Lucas's emotional state, while others felt he had crossed a line. Carly expressed concern that Lucas had let his anger take control. Elizabeth worried about how this would affect Marco's well-being, especially after everything he had been through recently. Later, alone with his thoughts, Lucas replayed the confrontation in his mind. Regret washed over him as he recognized that his reaction may have made an already painful situation worse. He knew he owed Marco an apology, but wasn't sure if Marco would be willing to hear it. Meanwhile, Marco confided in a close friend, admitting he never expected Lucas to react so intensely. Though hurt, Marco acknowledged that he might have handled the situation differently too. Still, the emotional toll was clear. As Port Charles buzzed with speculation, one question remained. Could Lucas and Marco find a way to repair their fractured trust, or had this moment permanently changed their relationship? The following morning, the tension from the confrontation still lingered in the air at General Hospital. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, careful not to say too much, but unable to ignore what had happened. Lucas arrived early for his shift, hoping work would distract him from the guilt weighing on his mind. Instead, every hallway seemed to echo the memory of the argument. Felix noticed Lucas's unusually quiet mood and gently asked if he was okay. Lucas tried to brush it off, but the concern in Felix's eyes made it harder to hide the truth. He admitted he had let his emotions get the best of him and feared he might have hurt Marco more deeply than he realized. Felix encouraged him to make things right before too much time passed. Across town, Marco avoided his usual routines. He declined invitations, turned off his phone, and kept to himself. The incident had shaken him, not just because of Lucas's reaction, but because it made him question whether their trust had been as strong as he thought. A close friend urged Marco not to shut Lucas out completely, reminding him that misunderstandings can grow worse in silence. Carly crossed paths with Lucas later that day and offered a few honest words. She reminded him that while anger is human, what matters most is what he does next. Lucas took that to heart. He realized that an apology wasn't enough. He needed to truly listen to Marco's side without letting his feelings take over. By evening, Lucas found the courage to go to Marco's apartment. He hesitated at the door, rehearsing what he would say. When Marco finally opened it, the silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Lucas spoke first, admitting he had reacted without thinking and expressing how deeply sorry he was for letting things spiral. Marco listened quietly. He admitted he had felt hurt and blindsided, but also confessed he hadn't been completely honest about everything, which may have contributed to Lucas's reaction. The conversation wasn't easy, but for the first time since the confrontation, they were actually hearing each other. They didn't solve everything that night, but they agreed on one thing. They didn't want this moment to define their relationship. As Lucas left, there was still uncertainty, but also a small sense of hope that healing could begin. Back in Port Charles, the gossip slowly faded, replaced by cautious optimism from those who cared about them. The road ahead wouldn't be simple, but both Lucas and Marco knew that rebuilding trust would start with patience, honesty, and a willingness to move forward together.
Port Charles began to settle back into its usual rhythm, but for Lucas and Marco, everything still felt delicate. They agreed to meet at the Metro Court for coffee, neutral ground, away from the hospital and away from the apartment where emotions had run high. The conversation started awkwardly, both searching for the right words, but slowly, honesty replaced tension. Marco admitted he had been afraid to tell Lucas the full story earlier because he didn't want to cause worry. In trying to protect him, he had unknowingly created distance. Lucas confessed that his fear of being left in the dark had triggered a reaction he wasn't proud of. For the first time, they were discussing not just what happened, but why it happened. Meanwhile, others in Port Charles were quietly rooting for them. Elizabeth noticed a slight change in Lucas at work. He seemed more thoughtful, less reactive. Felix commented that sometimes difficult moments force people to grow, and maybe this was one of those times. Later that week, Marco received an unexpected message connected to the original misunderstanding. New information came to light that clarified parts of the situation neither of them had fully understood before. Marco shared it with Lucas right away, choosing transparency over hesitation. This time, Lucas listened calmly. Instead of anger, there was understanding. He realized how easily assumptions had taken over before facts were clear. Marco saw the difference too, and felt reassured that Lucas was truly trying to change how he handled conflict. That evening, they took a quiet walk along the waterfront. There were no dramatic declarations, just small, meaningful exchanges. They talked about setting clearer boundaries, being more open, and not letting fear guide their reactions. As they stood watching the water, Marco gently said that trust isn't rebuilt in a single apology. It's rebuilt in moments like this. Lucas nodded, knowing he had a lot to prove, but feeling grateful that Marco was willing to give him the chance. Back at General Hospital, word slowly spread that Lucas and Marco were on better terms. The buzz that once fueled gossip now carried a quieter tone of relief. Though their relationship wasn't exactly as it had been before, it had something new, a deeper understanding of each other's vulnerabilities. And in Port Charles, where emotions often run high, that kind of growth was rare and worth holding on to. In the weeks that followed, Lucas and Marco found themselves navigating a quieter, more intentional version of their relationship. There were no grand gestures, just consistent effort. Lucas began checking in more often, not out of suspicion, but out of care. Marco, in turn, made a point to share things he might once have kept to himself. The small changes didn't go unnoticed by those around them. Felix teased Lucas about being unexpectedly patient, while Elizabeth quietly admired the maturity she was seeing from both men. One afternoon at General Hospital, Lucas was surprised when Marco stopped by with coffee. It wasn't the visit itself that caught him off guard. It was the ease between them. They laughed about something trivial, and for a moment it felt like the tension of the past had finally loosened its grip. But growth rarely comes without tests. Later that day, Lucas overheard a conversation that brought back echoes of the original misunderstanding. For a brief moment, he felt that familiar rush of doubt. He paused, remembering the promise he had made to himself. Instead of reacting, he went directly to Marco and asked calmly about what he had heard. Marco appreciated the approach. He explained the situation clearly, and together they realized how easily old patterns could have resurfaced. This time, they stopped it before it could turn into something bigger. That night, Marco admitted he had been nervous that Lucas might fall back into old habits. Lucas admitted he had been afraid of exactly the same thing. The honesty between them was becoming their strongest tool. Across Port Charles, the incident that once sparked so much talk had faded into the background. People moved on to other dramas, other headlines. But for Lucas and Marco, the experience had quietly reshaped how they communicated, how they trusted, and how they supported each other. One evening, as they sat together at the apartment, Marco reflected on how close they had come to losing everything over a moment of emotional overwhelm. Lucas agreed, saying that sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that change you the most. They didn't pretend everything was perfect. Instead, they accepted that relationships require ongoing work. And for the first time since that painful confrontation, both of them felt confident that they were building something stronger than before. Not because they avoided conflict, but because they had learned how to handle it together. In a town where emotions often spiral into chaos, Lucas and Marco had quietly found a way to steady themselves and each other.